In previous video, we talked about how the routing within an application is happening, how when we click on a particular link, it is caught by dispatcher servlet, which in turn hands over the control to a controller, and then controller retrieves the data back through the service layer and populates it into the view. In this video, we will see how that is happening. So before we go into that, we must talk about the different layers that our application has. So in our application, we have a controller layer which talks to the service layer. So the controller layer should never talk to the database or repository layer directly. It should always go through a service layer, which in turn will go to the repository layer, and repository layer will go to the database layer, or that is the DAO layer for us. So that is why if we open any particular controller, we will see that we have some services auto-wired into it. So in this case, we have a teacher service auto-wired in our teacher controller. So we see that the teacher service is actually an interface, and we are able to use this interface as if it was actually instantiated somewhere. Where is that? So that magic is happening from the auto-wired annotation. So I'll walk you through the flow, how does that actually happen. So in our application context, we have a context component scan defined with the base package of com mtcl oc. So anything in this base package which is not of type controller gets instantiated as a Spring Bean. So in this case, we have this particular com mtcl oc. I mean, this is again in this particular base package. So it instantiates all the beans that are listed over here that have a particular annotation on it. So we will see that teacher service impl has @service annotation on it, which means that application context will instantiate this bean, and it is implementing the type teacher service. So there is a teacher service type bean already instantiated. And when teacher controller does auto-wire for teacher service, it does that matching. There's an auto wiring by type. It sees that there is only one bean of type teacher service available, so it hands over that bean. The Spring container hands over that bean to teacher service object, the T service object, and it creates that particular object. So T service has the handle of this teacher service instantiated bean, and now it can it can execute the methods that are defined in the teacher service method, basically. So now let's go to the teacher service implementation, and let's see what are the methods implemented over here. So we'll see that we again have a teacher repository over here auto-wired, and we can just follow back and we can find out how teacher repository is done. So again, in the repository, which is part of com mtcl oc, again all the classes that are annotated with certain particular annotation will get instantiated. So in this case, a teacher repository is extending JPA repository, so it does not need a particular annotation per se. So in our case, we will see that in our configuration, application context, here it is. So we are defining JPA repositories over here in this particular base package. So even though we are not marking them with the @repository annotation, because we are defining the JPA repositories in this particular base package, it is going to instantiate these beans which are extending the JPA repository class as the Spring Beans. So it is of the of teacher repository. So it in turn it creates a implementation of it, and it hands over that particular object to the teacher controller, sorry, the teacher service. So to summarize, we have a teacher repository auto-wired over here. And then a teacher repository is marked as a JPA repository because it is in the package of the JPA repository base package, because of which it gets instantiated over here by Spring. In the Spring container, there is a bean that Spring creates out of it, and because it is of type teacher repository, it hands it over to the auto-wire teacher repository bean over here. So now that teacher repository has the handle of it, it is able to run certain methods. So there are some methods that are by default available by Spring JPA. So let's see what those are. So if I do teacher repository dot, so you can see that there are certain methods that are available. If I wanna delete a particular ID, it can delete a particular teacher from the table. I can do a find all, it will return the list of teachers. I can also do find one. So there are certain things that are available by default for us, like deleting a particular by the primary key, and then finding all of the values, and or finding any particular one value kind of thing. So just doing Control-C to go back. Okay, so I'm just using the default method of find one from the teacher repository. So if I open teacher repository, you will not see find one method over here. There is nothing defined over here as find one, but still I'm able to run find one because that's coming from the extended things that are coming from JPA repository. So if we open the JPA repository and if we see the source of that, we will find out that yes, there are certain methods that are already available for us that we are inheriting from the teacher, from the JPA repository into the teacher repository. So that is it for find one, and then we can get all the teachers by find all. So teacher repository is relatively the simpler one. Now let's have a look at a more complex repository that we have, and in order for us to do that, let's have a look at one of these parameterized solutions. So in this parameterized request mapping, we have something called get list of all the students by teacher ID, this one.